Today we are talking about Anatomy of a Fall. This is a 2023 film from Neon Productions. I'm here with Matt, and I have to say, Matt, I found this to be one of my favorite films of the year. And because of your legal background, I thought that this film would be right up your alley. And just to kind of kick it off, I thought the script and the very calculated reveal of evidence and plot points is what made Anatomy of the Fall one of my favorites of the year. I wanted to get your kind of knee jerk initial reactions from this film.
Well, I think what made it interesting was the fact that, like, coming out of it, it's a French movie, so I figured it might end like this. But like coming out of it, you still aren't 100% sure whether she did it or not. Like how the court found her, but like the facts, in my opinion, are just so like I don't think it was enough to convict her of the crime and say she was guilty, but it's just so like on the edge that she could have been guilty. And I think that was the what really pulled me in was me wanting to know what happened. And you don't really get that payoff, but that also helps, leave you thinking. And what I praise so many times in these podcasts is when the movie allows the viewer to come up with uh, conclusions on their own. So, I like that.
Absolutely. So, short synopsis, there's a family, two writers, parents, and a son who has vision problems, and the father is found dead right outside the homestead with an open window in the top floor of their home where he was working on insulating the attic, which brings to trial this incident under the assumption that the mother was the most likely suspect to have murdered him or that he committed suicide. And that's really the story the whole way through, where, and this is very brilliantly done, you feel in the dark and you get these little pieces of information that sway you one way, but you're just as easily swayed the other way as the story continues to unravel. That, in and of itself, is why I feel like this script is worthy of, Oscar accolades, all of that, because I truly do feel like it is the best script, at least that I've seen this year. And I think you touched upon this, Matt, but I want to throw it to you again. I mean, were you swayed back and forth throughout the runtime of this film?
Yeah, I was. I would say at first, I thought she wasn't guilty. Um, just I thought it was an accident. And I did, if this is a legal movie, I thought, okay, something else is going to come out in the future. And it did. And I thought the way it like unraveled itself was really interesting. Like you slowly learn that she's bisexual, and maybe that girl she had over talking to at the very beginning of the movie was someone she's interested in, and then you start assuming her husband might have known that. And that's why he was playing the music. They were fighting a lot. That big argument part of the movie is revealed, and that's kind of when I started bouncing to, okay, maybe she is guilty. And then you even see like her son turn on her, and then in the end, it didn't feel fully resolved in my head. The verdict didn't make me go, "Oh, okay, well, she must have for sure." I won't spoil it, but she must have for sure um, been what the court decided. It just kind of leaves it hanging.
Right. And while we're here, I just want to throw the question to the audience: did she do it? Yes or no? And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm brought to you here with Matt, aka War Champ on Letterboxd. If you want to give him a follow, he has great taste in movies, and I think that this is kind of an interesting kind of thing that we can do, Matt, because I think what the film did so brilliantly is it allows you to go down two separate paths where you can convince yourself that she is guilty or she is not guilty. And for the from the point where the first reveal being, like you said, she is bisexual, to the reveal of the fight, I was very much thinking she was guilty. Now, the ending kind of swayed me the other way, but I would like to just kind of go down this pathway with you, and then afterwards we'll kind of go down the pathway as though she's innocent. Does that sound good with you?
So you want to start off assuming she's guilty?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the biggest points I would make is her deceptive nature and how well she can lie. And I think that string is one that we can kind of pull on. That was one of the main reasons that I thought she could have very easily did it, because of the ease that she lied about having. I mean, I don't know if you would call it multiple affairs, but she had cheated on him multiple times, albeit with one person, and how cool, calm, and collected she was with the fact that they had gotten into a physical argument just 24 hours prior to the actual death.
Yeah, the fact that she was physical with him was a big thing. For like, you could hear on the recording, she obviously, like, I don't remember how she explained the fight, but she threw something or got physical, and that kind of stuff leads me to think, okay, it could have escalated into something more.
And because you would expect things, if things are going to escalate, it would be within a specific time frame, meaning you would expect it, if it's going to be punches to the face to maybe a shove out the window, you wouldn't expect like a week gap. There would have to be more things in between for that to happen. But within 24 hours, that doesn't seem like too far of a jump, to me at least.
Yeah, just the way I would have seen it if she's guilty doing it was, because there's the whole side thing about why the blind kid left the house. Was he lying to help her, or what? Did he really just go for a walk? Well, or like did he go to get away from an argument that was happening? And I don't know if that's really revealed why he did, or if I'm just forgetting. But like say that, let's assume that he did go away because they were arguing, then I would, it would still be circumstantial, but I would have to think that the argument, they must have been having it upstairs where he was playing his music, and something must have happened and he fell. Even if she didn't push him, I think she would have known what was happened and been held responsible in some sort of way.
Right. Like she let him do it, like she was privy to it. You know what I mean? And I'm not sure what the charge would be in France, but I think you would be brought up upon manslaughter charges. In this kind of, it's very different, but I do see some similarities. Do you remember, Matt? This had been highly publicized maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but there was a teenage girl. I think she was a senior in high school, and she had texted her then boyfriend to end his own life, and she had charges brought upon her for encouraging that behavior. And I feel like there could potentially be some similarities, even if there isn't as concrete proof as there was in that real life American based case.
Yeah, of course I remember that case. That was like a big deal, at least like in terms of people that follow like legal true crime cases. And also I think it was a big deal in, I'm not really in the legal community. I'm not sure how this might have affected the laws in any way, but I do know that the fact that she could get convicted, I think it was, I don't know if it was a degree of murder, if it was manslaughter that she got convicted with, but the fact that that can be considered like texting someone over the phone and telling them to do all this stuff and like get out of the car or like kill yourself can be considered manslaughter or murder. Well, that just like opens up the door for, other things. I think that's the point you're trying to make. Like if she were upstairs and she was like convincing him to jump off and
Mhm.
he did it. I think that could be considered manslaughter. But the problem with the story here would be there's no evidence besides what would be her confession to that happening.
Here's another thing, and it's just a point that it doesn't necessarily prove her guilt, but it's actually something that I would have. They probably did bring up in the trial, and if you remember, so let me know. I think they had brought up the height of the railing along the deck outside of the attic. Their initial argument was she struck him and that the angle with which that would have had to have happened was very improbable, which was pointing towards her innocence. But I feel like the most, I guess, believable in my mind is that he was shoved and that the head injury occurred from, like the defense said, the shed hitting his skull on his descent down. I think that to be much more likely than she strikes a blow and then he falls, because I would think it's much more likely to fall over the banister if shoved as opposed to you get struck and then your body tumbles over the railing. And I don't know why they didn't pursue that more fervently.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the one thing I'll say about that whole, um, I guess you would consider it experts, like the people that come in and testify. Okay, like according to our measurements and our reenactments, and the little dummy they threw off the building to like represent and reenact the situation. They can have multiple conclusions, and like in some cases, you will have um, like something like that, and a lot of times it's like bullet markings. Like they'll say, "Oh, this bullet had to come from this gun." So those types of experts that are testifying, a lot of the times, like they'll say different theories, and then, in my opinion, that just leaves the jury, or in this case, like the court, with, well, like what are we supposed to believe? They're almost equally plausible here, and I think only in some cases, if they're trying to prove that a suicide wasn't a suicide, and things like, oh, well, they had to have shot it at this angle, which is just so improbable. I think in those cases, like these sort of demonstrations become a lot more important. But I think here it just kind of still leaves you with questions.
Yes, exactly. Here's another point towards guilt, in my opinion. Though this is extremely circumstantial, but I think if it's just trying to accurately paint the, I guess, defendant, is that in the argument, which is recorded, where we probably get the most clear glimpse of what she is like when not kind of putting on a show, and albeit it was in the midst of an argument, which can oftentimes, like she said, show just one aspect of your personality. She came off as very cold, distant, and I might even go so far to say as sociopathic, which I think would be the type of personality you would need to have to pull off the murder and then claim innocence after the fact, the way that she did. What are your thoughts?
Yes, yes, I think you're exactly right, and I wanted to bring up a point about this, that I feel like a lot of people get convicted kind of for that reason, or at least online, you'll see people that have been convicted of something. Everyone's going and saying, "Oh, they're clearly a narcissist here," and all this stuff, and like they must have been guilty. Like, look at the way they're reacting to what happened. They don't even seem sad. I think in terms of legally convicting someone, I don't think you could use, in my opinion, that shouldn't be used just because people are so different and everyone has different types of reactions. But I will say that that kind of thing is more convincing to a lot of juries, and even, to me watching the film, that kind of thing is so convincing. I don't know if it's that we look at people and we want to think that we're right about someone because the way we're judging them based on how they're acting. I don't know what it is, but like I was having those same thoughts, like, oh, she exploded here. Clearly, she has like a dark side that she might just get really angry, and no one really sees that. Her lawyer friend, for example, like they look like old. I mean, they are old friends. They seem to like each other a lot, but it's like he's probably never seen that side of her. And so, you start making assumptions like, did she actually do it? And is sociopathic in the sense that she can lie a lot and just cover that up. And then, you have other things come out like she's a serial cheater and she might have been trying to cheat on her husband with the girl at the beginning of the film, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, here's another slightly damning element. I want to start with the less damning, and then what I think is maybe one of the most damning elements is I think at certain times the lawyer, he didn't outright say it, but he very much alluded to the fact that even he thought she was guilty. And then what I found to be most damning was that Sandra Hewler, the defendant, she did not bring up the fact that he had been majorly depressed slash suicidal until the lawyer put it to her, like, frankly, look, like, the accidental angle's not going to hold up in court. You will be found guilty if that's the defense we decide to go with. We need something more. And then 2 days later is when she decided to say, well, he had tried to commit suicide in the past. And I thought that was just way too convenient a not alibi but kind of cover story for my liking, and it made me very, very dubious to her being truthful, I think.
Yeah, yeah. There's always the possibility that she really just was too scared and didn't want them to pin it on her. But I think that the fact that she didn't even tell her friend that kind of stuff, like, because she didn't want him to think, or she says it's because she didn't want him to think she was guilty. But I feel like, like kind of back to what I was saying, like just a second ago, like if I think what would I probably do in a situation where like well, I don't have a wife, but like someone really close to me died, I feel like I would want to tell, a police officer or my lawyer everything about them. And if they really were like depressive and suicidal recently, I feel like that would be one of the first things I told someone, because and it wouldn't be because I'm trying to say, oh no, they committed suicide, I didn't do it. It's because I would be like in my own head trying to figure out why they did it and processing it, and it kind of seemed like she just jumped immediately to, let me do everything I can to make myself seem innocent.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And this is the last one that really comes to mind. And I don't know if this is one that a lot of audience members, their mind would go to immediately, but it just struck me while we were watching it. And part of the reason is because this is such a big element that convinces, I think, the son especially, of the mom's innocence. I and you this is the most arguable too, but I just don't find it believable that a man of that age would try to end his own life by overdosing on aspirin, of all things, and specifically out of a kind of like a bubble packet like they have. If you think about this, and I think those bubble packs at most maybe have like 24 aspirin in them, give or take. I could be very, very wrong on that assumption, but I can't imagine there are a ton more than that. So you're gonna tell me at the maximum, he's taking 24 aspirin, which in some cases probably could kill you, but a man who's like in a relatively healthy age, I don't think you would die from that. And obviously he didn't when he did. I feel like if you look at statistics, men are more likely to end their own lives in more violent methods. Uh, Jumping off a building or your house is more plausible, but I think you see firearm, suicide to be much more likely in men, whereas poisoning is actually something much more likely for women, both in suicide and in murder, ironically. I think it points more towards she could have been poisoning him. She said he was very drunk the night before. Maybe she tried to poison him with aspirin, or it's all fabricated.
Yeah, that's I have, being into different types of crime stuff, I do know that what you said is right. The first part about men are more likely to kill themselves like by like shooting themselves, and women are more likely to kill themselves by like trying to overdose on pills. And yeah, I also feel like taking like Advil is or aspirin is like the idea to do that to kill yourself. I feel like would come more from someone who's like younger and
Mm-hmm.
not like a grown adult man. And but the other thing I found like odd about the suicide thing was I felt like at least their argument they had, like there wasn't enough there for me to make me think he was like very suicidal. Like I know we
Mm-hmm.
took her word for it basically, but I mean he seemed like at least from what was shown, it seemed like that was kind of like a more normal argument, and they didn't show a lot of things to make me think he was like very depressed and suicidal. More just that he was kind of like unhappy, maybe in his what he was doing with life now, and he kind of wanted a break, and he wanted to get away for a little bit. But I can't know that for sure. But from what the movie showed me, that was kind of what the assumption I came to. So like I I don't think well, like if she didn't do it, I think it was an accident and it wasn't suicide. That's my opinion.
I could see that for sure. Accident does seem very plausible. I'm not sure exactly why. I think it's just because the narrative is so uh, like unsexy, for lack of a better term. You know, if he were to do it himself or if she were to do it, that kind of strikes people like in their hearts, and people want to believe one or the other. But an accident, while I think it's equally as plausible as either scenario, I just think it's not a good enough story for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, like that story doesn't sell.
Right.
People don't really care about that anymore.
And apparently, I could be getting the actual case that this is based on incorrect, but I think this film and the script was based off the staircase. Did you follow that? There was a Netflix series that came out about that trial that I think was served as an inspiration for this movie.
Oh, I did not watch that series, but I think I know the case you're talking about. I think it's a guy, oh, is his name like John Peterson or something? And it's debated like if he killed his wife or whether she fell down the stairs and it was an accident.
Yes, yeah, I myself did not watch the series, but I did. I kind of popped in. My parents were watching it as it came out, and the theories were absolutely wild. But it had people kind of on both sides of the fence, like this movie was really aptly able to do. And what I like about this movie was some of the speculation and theories proposed in court for the real life case are actually a lot more hard to believe than how Anatomy of the Fall is put. Because one of the theories, and if anyone watching this, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, there was a theory that an owl had attacked the wife, and that was could have potentially caused her to fall because she had these like deep abrasions on her head that they were arguing was consistent with an owl attack, which is like crazy to that sounds crazy, but apparently I think he got off for that death, but this seems way more plausible for either murder or suicide.
Yeah, no, I actually remember that. I know I haven't seen the series, but I had read something, I don't know what it was about that case. And I remember because I remember that part now, and I remember thinking like that was so ridiculous. And if that actually happened that way, that would be like worse luck than getting struck by lightning.
Exactly. So let me ask you, Matt, after discussing the yes, she did it side, do you feel more swayed that she did do it? Are you leaning like 60-40 she did it now that we discussed that side?
I don't know, it's hard for me to say, like, would I convict her in a courtroom as a juror? Absolutely not, because I don't think there's enough evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, gut instinct, I think that like, my gut instinct is that she didn't kill him, but she was up there when it happened, or she had more involvement than she's letting on. That's kind of what my gut tells me.
Yeah, and before we switch over to the she did not do it side, him having the music blasting and she said I went up to rest directly below where the music was stemming from, that just seems like you said she's trying to put herself in a different place of the house rather than at the scene of the crime.
Yeah, I think this is all kind of deliberate on her part of trying to be like, "Oh, I didn't hear or see a single thing." And I think that kind of goes to show she's lying and she knows more than she's letting on.
Right. And and just going back to your point, the argument seems as though he's very inspired. He seems set to stand up for himself. And it seems like, even in that very passive aggressive way, by playing the music, he was standing up for himself and basically not standing idly by while, maybe the mom cheats on him again. And I think he was kind of gearing up for another argument. So, the way that the events actually do play out, I could see a murder being much more likely than a suicide. It just seems like the events of that day are kind of, we're taking the steps towards a final argument where things could easily get physical. And imagine if the argument that happened in the kitchen happened by the window where he was working prior. Uh, it does seem more probable as we kind of discuss it. in my mind at
Ge-
least.
Yeah, it seems to me that I don't think after that her student or that girl at the beginning left that she would just go rest or whatever she said. I think she would go confront him about it, and I think that something would have happened after that.
Right, like, in your personal relationships, if someone was doing something and deliberately to irk you or frustrate you, and it seems like in their relationship too specifically, she is the type of person to attack it head on. I think she is her biggest advocate and her biggest proponent, so I could easily see her like standing up for herself. And I think that also is very much in line with the son deciding to go for a walk then, because like he said, he would oftentimes leave the house if a fight was brewing. And it was probably very palpable that there was about to be a big argument.
Yeah, and I just think like the circumstantial story, like without hard evidence, goes to supporting something like this happening. Like exactly what you were saying. Like he was egging her on. He was pissed. He was playing the music. She knew what he was doing was trying to make her mad. So she likely went and confronted him about it. And then, like, my other thought is like, what the best possible explanation. Like, I don't think for what happened. I don't think he was doing anything like the type of work. I don't remember exactly what it was that he was doing in the attic. I don't think was the kind of work that he might have fallen from. And also like his character, to me, what we got to see of him, he didn't come off as suicidal. And it's kind of like the best explanation in my mind, like most plausible, is that like they got in that argument similar to the one that he recorded, and something happened and he fell.
And then this is the cherry on top for me. And then I want to throw it to you if you have anything additional that you think stands out towards swaying the public opinion towards she did do it. The conversation that the father had with the son was the concrete circumstantial evidence that the son took to just sway him towards innocence. I think a reasonable explanation would be, I think a father's job is to try to get their son ready for to be a man, and to make sure that they're prepared for the responsibility that comes with adulthood. So that conversation doesn't completely stand out in my mind, but I think if you look at it through a slightly different lens, it does completely change everything. In that the father could have been scared for his life and thinking that the wife might take things too far in the future. And I think that completely reframes the the discussion that they had, that he thought things might escalate. I might have to either leave my wife or she might take things too far. And I want to make sure that my son is ready if that happens. What say you, Matt?
Can you just briefly remind me real quick the conversation or what was like said between the dad and the kid, because I don't quite remember all of it.
Yeah, to paraphrase, he said, your dog, but he was very careful about how he said it, so he wasn't outright like, I'm going to die someday and you need to be ready to take that loss when it happens. But that was the essence of what he said. He said, your dog will be gone someday and you have to be ready for that, and you have to be ready to lose people you love. The way I'm putting it is much
Oh.
more on the nose than what he said. He was very, I would say, tactful about the way he said it, but that was essentially what he was trying to say.
It came back to me now. I remember. I think that. You in my mind that could go one of two ways. I think they were showing that, to try and promote the side of he was more suicidal and he was thinking about death and those kinds of things, and it was obviously on his mind. But I think that maybe he was just down. It seemed like another thing that I think adds on to this is the fact that he was recording different things in his life, and he kind of possibly decided to record that conversation that he knew would turn into an argument. And it was like previously he was just recording, like it seemed like happy things, I think is what they insinuated. And then now it's like he's kind of gone into this like depressive state where he seems to be like more interested in like dark and depressing things. That's kind of what I like got from that. And I think now that you remind me of that, I think that would be the only thing that would lead me in my head to think maybe he was suicidal. But like besides those things, I just doesn't don't think there was a lot there to support that.
Right. Yeah, I would have to re-examine the conversation. I do feel it's foreboding, right? I just part of me, especially after we discussed the elements that they point towards her guilt, that there could have been the underlying thought that he didn't want to bring about was that he might have been scared of being killed, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't. I do you feel like there was more in there to support that? I mean, besides obviously the argument when she got physical, that maybe he was kind of scared of her in that way. Because I think that the conversation would be one of the only things that I mean, clearly, like she's cheated on him multiple times, and he's still with her. There's stuff like that where it seems like she is the more dominant one in the relationship. But yeah, I don't know. I guess what did you? Is that what like when he was saying those things? Is that what came to mind for you? Is that he was kind of scared of her and maybe afraid that she'd do something?
When I initially saw it, it actually convinced me of him being suicidal, but I only really looked at it through this lens as we were discussing her being guilty. And here are some it seems as though he is more determined to take control of his life than he had been prior. For example, in the argument, he's now saying that you stole my idea for a book. He's standing up for himself, whereas it seemed previously he was okay with standing idly by. He's playing the music to disturb her discussion with a female, whereas he had let her cheat on him previously. And both of those things, at least for me, are more indicative of someone who has almost recaptured that essence for life than someone who is at the end of their rope.
Yeah, I think so. I'm finally kind of grasping what you were trying to put together. And I think you're right about that. Like, I know it's like a different perspective, and I feel like the movie was trying to use those things to get us to think suicide as a possibility. But I think that like the kind of way you spend it right there is right because like the way like what I was trying to say at first was like his character didn't really come off suicidal to me, and I think like your view of him doing these things in defiance of her, him even like I think what that big argument they got into that was recorded was about was him trying to I think lead to do something else he wanted to do for his own in his own life that he hadn't gotten a chance to. And I think he was I think you're right about him like seeming like he was finally taking a stand and trying to like make his life his own anymore. And I felt like he might have been felt like he was being controlled by her. And I think all this goes towards the theory or supporting the theory that they got into that argument because it was like, constantly he's trying to defy her and she explodes and they fight. And I just feel like when that music was playing, she would have gone up there is the most likely explanation.
Right. This has definitely swayed me a lot. And I think it's going to make what we're about to do even more difficult. But before we start to argue the she did not do it side, Matt, is there anything additional that you think could point further towards guilt? I know I think we didn't really touch on the psychiatrist, and I did find him to be impactful, at least as the story was unfolding. Is there anything else that you would like to bring up towards the she did do it side?
I don't know if this goes towards guilt, and it's kind of in the realm of that whole thing I was cautioning against earlier. Like, oh, if someone's acting a certain way, it doesn't mean they're guilty. Everyone like goes through grief differently, but the way she was like, I know there nothing happened between them, but there was like some weird tension between her and that lawyer friend. To me, it felt like she didn't really love her husband. It didn't seem like
Mm.
she fully cared. I think that would be the only other thing uh, that would like convince me.
Yeah, and just harkening back to a case that is similar from that aspect, and I think a lot of people point towards guilt for the exact reason that you brought up, is the Casey Anthony case. And I'm sure you're very familiar, like much of the nation is, with that case. And I think a fact that has come out in the years following is that she was sleeping with her lead attorney, I believe, and was even brought into the firm because of their relationship. And I think a lot of people point towards that being another sign of guilt for Casey Anthony because of, and it's different with a baby as opposed to a husband, right? But the ability to just kind of move on without a proper grieving period does seem suspicious, to put it lightly.
Yeah, right. Like everyone's suspicious of that. But I guess the thing you can always say is you just don't know how you're going to react till something like that happens.
Very true. Very true. And like you said, that is why it couldn't be held up as a concrete thing. But I think with a lot of these circumstantial things like the grieving process or lack thereof, and how she was in the recording of that argument, it's very important to try to paint a portrait of who this person is when eyes aren't on them, to see what type, you know what I mean? That is very important because then you can start to extrapolate their motivations and how their decision making might be, as opposed to if you only have the version that we see while they're in court, because you're obviously trying to portray yourself as well as you possibly can.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So now, is there anything additional towards guilt?
No, I think that's it for me.
This is going to be difficult now because I've started to kind of convince myself, as have you convinced me, more of her guilt. But she didn't do it. And I think, obviously, for me, the biggest piece of information was the conversation. We obviously reframed that towards guilt, but I do think you can clearly look at what was said and say, even like you brought up, that does seem as though he's trying to prepare his son for potentially losing him.
You're saying that was kind of your biggest reason to think she wasn't, or that he committed suicide.
That to me definitely stands out the most. And on top of that, obviously, the aspirin. If that is the case, if he tried to overdose on aspirin, yes. I mean, that is a very clear sign that he was suicidal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, so the way I think about, and this is just like me personally, because I'm in law school, the way I think about these things is a lot different because I mean, but I guess I can't really use it here because we're not in a U.S. court. But in the U.S., like you have to prove beyond like there's standards of the jury. You should only convict this person if you know beyond a reasonable doubt that they did it. So that is like a between 90-95% chance. Like you've got to really be sure that they did it if you're going to convict them. And to me, in this case, there just was not enough hard evidence that she did it. And I'm sure that's the same reason that the guy in that real life case we were talking about earlier got off was because there simply just wasn't enough evidence that he himself did it. Um, and but besides that, like besides the whole legal thing, um, I think that it just, I mean, while she did seem like she had a temper and blew up, to me, she didn't seem like a killer. It didn't seem like she would have wanted to just take her son and get away from her husband. She seemed to not hate him enough to want to murder him. Also, just the way it happened, like the fact that she would let her son discover his dad's body
Mm,
is, also like you would have to start assuming she's a pretty cold person for her to have like physically murdered him, and it wasn't just maybe an accident after they were fighting, and it wasn't manslaughter, it was pure murder. I think we would have to start assuming that she was a pretty like an individual that lacked a lot of emotion, and it seemed like she cared for her son more than that.
right. That's a very, very valid point that you bring up, that you're basically throwing your son into the wood chipper as far as emotional trauma goes, to have him be the one to uncover it. Now the counter argument obviously would be there would be suspicious circumstances for her to be the one to uncover that herself, and she would likely have to leave the crime scene like that upon the son's return. And you could argue the cold heartedness of her in other ways, but that was something that, at least early on in the story, I definitely spoke to me. The fact that that is such a terrible trauma to unfold on your son, or whether it's murder, suicide, whatever. Any normal mother would not want that for her son. So I completely agree with you there. Um, it is difficult though, because especially after discussing the she did it side, I feel like you could paint a portrait that she was kind of sociopathic in a way, and that this, while I don't know if you could orchestrate it though. The son obviously left on his own fruition, so she couldn't have really planned that out. She obviously didn't plan the music happening, which probably inspired the son to leave, thinking there would be a fight about that. Though she could have been, I don't know. I think that actually, the more I dig into that, I think that is maybe one of the best kind of arguments, is that, like you said, I don't think she would want to do that to her son. But I think you could really argue it either way, which I want to say is one of the reasons that I feel this story and the script is just so tight and interesting, is how
Yeah,
everything can
yeah,
go both ways.
yeah, absolutely. I think putting on my defense lawyer hat, if I'm defending her, you just have to point to, like, it's harder in my opinion to come up with reason she's not guilty as opposed to reason she is, because finding the reason she's not, you got to start pointing to the absence of things. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, you have to start looking at, was there any signs of a fight in the attic? No, there. Like I don't think they mentioned anything like that. You've got to think about uh, like what was there any evidence, or I guess the only other eyewitness would be the girl who left. But you would, I guess, you'd have to think about, were there any cameras or anything that pointed to her doing it besides circumstantial evidence, like fingerprints or some kind of markings that show that um, that she shoved him or pushed him or something along those lines, or even like any kind of proof that she was or wasn't ever in the attic, like certain things like doors being opened weird ways, all that different type of stuff. And and so when you have a case like this where there's really a lack of a lot of physical evidence, then a lot of the times, just to convince people that someone's innocent, that's what you're supposed to point out. So I think, like, to defend her, you would have to just point to the lack of any hard evidence showing. It'd be like, look, there's nothing here to show that she's guilty except our theories, basically, like what we put the most weight into before. We When we were just discussing the pro guilty side, was we were just basically making assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's probably this way. She's sociopathic. Different things like that. Where like you in like the legal world, like those assumptions you can't make without backed up evidence. So it would just be, to defend her. Yeah, you just have to point to the lack of things showing that she was up there at that time doing that.
Right. And from a legal standpoint, I do agree with, I think, your kind of beginning sentiment in this one, in that it's very much up in the air and there is nothing solid to point one direction or the other, and you can obviously lean one way to what you think the actual narrative was and what you believe, but it's there's no smoking gun. One thing that I will say that I do think does play a big role towards pointing towards her being potentially innocent, and what ultimately swayed the judge seemingly from a story standpoint, is not just what the son said, but that he was also willing to take a stand for his mother, which I think at least would point more towards the fact that she is someone who he loves, and for that to be so, there must be a goodness in her. He's very young, so maybe potentially he doesn't know that his mom is a bad person if she is, but you would think if a son has that love for his mother, she can't be completely disassociated or completely sociopathic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, like it's clear he didn't hate her. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't seem like she abused him or anything. It didn't seem like she was an like a super evil person to her son. Another thing that kind of goes with that I'd say supports her innocence is that there wasn't really a motive to kill him, at least. Like if this happened, I don't think it was intentional. I don't think she went up there wanting to push him out. I think the only way it could have happened is they fought, and it was either an accident or it was a heat of the moment, which would be, that's still murder, but it's just not premeditated murder. So I think that, like, a lack of motive, and even a motive, and you could argue a motive in the other direction, like she wouldn't want her husband dead because I think they mentioned one time, like, her son loved the dad, like maybe even a little more than her. He spent more time with the son than she did. um I think all those things would kind of, the motive would be not to kill instead of to kill.
Right. And like you said, which I think is, if it were to be a murder, it seems much more accidental or heat of the moment, like you said. And that's like a disorganized murder. Something completely thrown together that you didn't put thought into, like you said, not premeditated. And you would have to be extremely cunning, extremely cold, calculated, all of the above to be able to basically take that wild card thrown at you and be able to run with it and proclaim your innocence and be so calm and cool about it. I feel like in a murder like that where you're not premeditated, it would be much more difficult to kind of play it cool in the aftermath of it. Does that make sense at all?
Oh, absolutely, because I think, if she did, she would have still been, fired up with rage or some sort of emotion right after, when her son found the body. And it seemed like more that she seemed surprised herself. I feel like if she would have done it, um, yeah, it's just like what we were saying before. You just have to really assume that she's extremely manipulative, extremely good at hiding her emotions, or not feeling very many emotions in the first place. She would be this extremely evil character to be the type of person that could try and convince her own son um, that she didn't do it. And yeah,
And you would think someone who is, well, I don't know, because they did fight and it did seemingly get violent, but if you're to take her perspective on it, which was that he was the one who was being more violent than her, that I'm like, it's where I'm trying to go with it is what is her motive? This seemingly makes things much more difficult for her. So we are supposed to hold two separate beliefs in our mind that she is both extremely reactive for them to get in a fight and then also completely cold and calculated at the same time. Whereas, how would that make sense? If she's cold and calculated, wouldn't murdering him make her life more difficult? There would be a trial. There wouldn't be someone to look after her child. It just, I'm sure there's ways to argue against that, but it just seems like we're trying to hold two disputive beliefs at once if we're to believe that, I guess.
yeah, I know what you're saying. You're saying like we have to assume that she could get so fired up easily enough to kill her husband, shove him out the window. But at the same time, she can hide her emotions so well to right after it happened, to her own family members and friends. And it's just like people like that usually don't exist. Like if you are the type that your temper gets so bad where you're gonna kill someone like that, your temper is probably gonna get bad if, for example, like that attorney was really hard questioning her and stuff like that. Like I think some more simple things like that would have gotten her more fired up.
Yes, absolutely. Because that's almost the exact scenario that we have to convince ourselves that got her to a murderous rage if we're to believe that she murdered him, quite frankly. So, I mean, now that we talk through that, if it were a jury trial, which obviously in this case it wasn't, if that were to be proposed to me, it does poke a tremendous hole in the theory. And, if you have a shadow of a doubt in the United States, at least, you do have to, hold them innocent. And I do think that that does cast enough of a shadow of a doubt over this to at least make it plausible that she did not do it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the stuff the way they did it in France was also very interesting. The way the whole trial worked.
Yes, I found that to be extremely interesting too. Not only the pomp and circumstance, for lack of a better term. I mean, I know that is also, I think, the case in England, but, it's presented entirely different than what we are accustomed to in the United States. What did you think of the presentation that the movie had with the legal process, but also just your thoughts as a whole as to what it's like over there?
It to me it was pretty crazy because I mean you had at one point her questioning someone else in the courtroom while she was on the stand being questioned.
Mm-hmm.
You had him reading that book that completely irrelevant would probably never be allowed in a court in the US. You had like no, people didn't really object. Like there was not an objection system
Mm-hmm.
like you see in every US legal movie. And it just seemed like I would say it was less structured. Like in the US, we have like very strict rules of evidence about how evidence gets into the courtroom, how the trial process is supposed has to work. And it seemed like those rules were much more lax, and it seemed like um, a lot more you could get away with a lot more in the French courtroom.
Right. It seemed nearly conversational in some ways in the US. I think it's a lot more abrupt, especially like you said with objections. In this, it was more, it flowed. And I don't know whether in reality that's how it is or if that is what they were going for from a story standpoint. But it was definitely more just one thing kind of rolled into another. Whereas in the United States, I mean, your your objection is you're trying to kind of stop the momentum from getting going, whereas this, both sides were kind of allowed to snowball in different areas.
Yep. Yeah. Like they were allowed to ask all types of questions that would have been objected to and probably not allowed in the U.S.
I want to ask you, is there any other circumstances or points of evidence, anything additional that sways you, taking the legal aspect out of it from a pure narrative standpoint, that makes you think she did not do it?
Hmm. I I know we've kind of touched on this, but it the way she cared about her kid
Mm,
afterwards, I feel like if she did it, maybe she I don't know. Like it just made it seem like she was a little more caring than a lot of the evidence led out to be, and a lot of what the movie made it look like that what we were just talking about earlier, like a lot of the reasons we thought she was guilty. Um, I mean, I guess we've already talked about this, but I'm just trying to say, like all this the stuff that we used to thought she was guilty. You could also just look the way she interacted with her son. I felt like she really did love him, and I think that if she would have done something like this, that would have been different. But that's a huge speculation on my part.
right. Now, I have to say, I came into this feeling more geared towards the she did it side. And despite us being able to create many more narratives that would point towards that, at the end of the day, I do think that I lean slightly towards she didn't do it. And again, that is so cool when a film can present the same story to multiple people and it allows them to each come to their own conclusions for their own specific reasons. And like, I haven't seen a film like that. I don't know if I ever have, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because I think even though I think we kind of have similar feelings about what happened, like after having this discussion, like I'm very set in my belief that she was involved, but it was an accident. But then,
Mm,
like, I also think, I wouldn't convict her. So is she? I don't know. I'm still conflicted about it. But that, like when I think of everything that happened, what the movie was trying to show, I just feel like that was the most plausible scenario. Is that because if she didn't actually, like, if we're saying she didn't mean to kill him, like it was an accident, they were arguing, maybe she didn't push him, but maybe like he was going to do something to her and he slipped or something and she
mm.
just saw it. Like she had no, well, like she didn't touch him, but she saw everything happen. I in my mind, she could have acted the same way she did if that had happened, because like she wouldn't feel as guilty herself. She would just feel like, okay, I really didn't do this and I know they're going to come after me and I need to protect myself. And that's kind of the way she acted. But at the same time, like I was a little more involved than I'm letting on. Like I saw him fall, or he was going to hit me or come after me, but he slipped and fell. And so I just kind of shut my mouth and act like I never saw a single thing. To me, that's kind of my final conclusion.
And I think something that points or could point very strongly towards that as a possibility is that she, despite the terrible situation she found herself in, wanted to protect the husband, keeping the argument a secret and keeping the aspirin thing a secret all kind of point towards the fact that perhaps it wasn't, oh, I just didn't think of it until now. Instead, was I didn't want to paint my husband as someone who either killed himself or was very unbalanced slash emotional, unstable, whatever, that he could have either fallen, like you said, from, a dispute, a physical dispute, or that he would kill himself. And that actually kind of points towards more the fact that even though they weren't on the best of terms, she did care about his legacy and she cared about him.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
This was a super interesting movie, and Matt, I want to thank you for joining me. This was a cool ass conversation, and I'm really glad we got to do it. I thought this movie was right up your alley, and after this discussion, I really do think it was. What was your overall thoughts on the movie itself as a story? How much did you enjoy it, and what was your rating for the film?
I thought it was a very interesting movie in the sense that I like what you were just saying before. I had never really seen a movie or a legal movie quite like this before. I thought that like the case itself is something you almost never see in real life, just because there's usually like a little more certainty, where I think this presented one of those cases, those rare cases where no one's really sure what happened and the only person that can know is her herself. So overall, I thought the story and the script was very good. I personally, I think I watched it a little too late. I kind of zoned out a little during the trial. Like I would say in the middle um, hour maybe ish, because this movie was also very long. But overall, I enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars.
So I brought it up again, but it bears repeating. I liked the the thought that went into the script, and you have to be so careful with what's revealed, what's used as evidence, and whatnot to be able to maintain this ability to allow people to not be completely convinced one way or another. So I really I appreciated the thought and care that went into the script. And I thought how they paced it as far as when information was given to us was just superbly done. I gave this film a 4.5 out of 5. I really really enjoyed it, and it's one of my top movies of the year. Um, I wish you had liked it a little bit more, Matt, but I'm definitely I'm glad that you did like it, and again, I'm really glad we got to talk about it.
Yeah, I enjoyed this conversation. You know, I love talking about movies and especially legal movies when I can bring in a little bit of my knowledge.
From your standpoint, and I know we had talked about this before, but I'm not sure if anything had changed. Have you found a legal movie that has kind of jumped up your ratings? Anything new you saw, or do you currently have a favorite movie that does dip into the legal realm of film?
Huh. I think my favorite legal movie might still be Primal Fear.
I
Have you
love
did you
that one.
watch that one? Yeah, I think that might. I mean, that one just. It's just there's so many twists and turns that I just remember when I was watching that I was just like constantly on the edge of my chair.
Yeah, Edward Norton is tremendous in that. Uh, Another thing that I just want to say, the lead actress, her name is Sandra Hewler, I believe it's pronounced. I really fucking dug her performance in this. It's in my mind, it is slightly reminiscent of, well, I was going to say Edward Norton, but it's actually much, much different because Norton puts on this face as though he's kind of like this stuttering, unsure of himself person. But I just really liked the way she presented this character because it does equally. It makes you believe that she could do it. This kind of stone persona that she puts on, but also kind of fiery in other aspects. It was a very nuanced performance, and I thought she really nailed it.
Yeah, I thought her performance was great because I mean, like, it's interesting. Like, almost most of what we've been discussing here is kind of like her personality or how we felt about her, and I felt like as an actress, she was so good at that that she felt like a real person to me in the movie. And I actually just looked at her letterbox page, and she's in this other new movie that came out recently called The Zone of Interest that I'm probably going to see this weekend. It's at the theater near me. But that's just an aside. That movie also looks really interesting. I just noticed she's one of the leads, so I'll be excited about that.
I noticed that she's in that film as well. You'll have to let me know, uh, first of all, how that movie is and how her performance is, because I feel like she's probably really, really good in that. But the film, too, looks super interesting. It's been getting a lot of positive reviews. So that one's on my list for something I must watch. So definitely let me know how that film is. But Matt, I just want to say thank you again. You have been great. All of you, thank you for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and look up War Champ on Letterbox to see as well whether Matt likes the zone of interest. And we will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.